Her peaceful farm in the countryside turns into a battleground when a group of ruthless criminals invade, seeking to take what they want without consequence. But they make one fatal mistake. They underestimate the man who built this land. A former Marine, hardened by war and loss, will show them that some men are never truly unarmed. What starts as a home invasion will become a reckoning that none of them will ever forget. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. A quiet night before the storm. The night was calm over the vast stretch of land. A light breeze rustled the wheat fields, the gentle sway of the stalks whispering secrets to the moon. A wooden house, sturdy and worn by time, stood at the heart of the farm, its porch creaking softly under the weight of a single rocking chair. Inside, dim lights flickered, casting long shadows against old walls. Ethan Carter exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, a whiskey glass resting in his calloused hand. His muscles, still defined despite the years since his last deployment, ached from the long day of work. The farm had become his sanctuary, his place of peace after the chaos of war. Through the open window he could hear the faint laughter of his daughter Emily inside. She was his world, the only thing in his life that still made sense. At 20 years old, she had inherited her mother's beauty. Long auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a stubborn spirit that rivaled his own. Ethan smiled to himself. No matter how much he tried to keep his past buried, no matter how much he avoided the man he once was, Emily always had a way of reminding him what truly mattered. He had fought for this peace, and he would kill to protect it. The unseen threat. Miles away, deep in the woods that bordered the farm, a black SUV sat hidden among the trees. The engine was off. The occupants inside, 5 men, rough, scarred and reeking of bad intentions, watched the farm through night vision scopes, studying every inch of the property. "Guy's ex-military," one of them muttered, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "And?" another scoffed. "He's just a washed-up vet playing farmer now. He ain't seen action in years." The leader, a man known only as Cruz, smirked. His sharp features were illuminated by the glow of his lighter as he lit a cigar. "Doesn't matter," he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "We're not here for him." His eyes narrowed as he zoomed in on the image of Emily stepping onto the porch, stretching under the glow of the porch light. She's the prize. A cruel chuckle spread through the vehicle. Tonight, the farm wouldn't be quiet for long. The first mistake. Ethan felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air, the unsettling tingle at the back of his neck. Instincts honed through years of battle flared to life. He sat up straighter, scanning the tree line beyond the fence. His fingers tightened around his whiskey glass. The night had changed. The peace had fractured. Something was coming. Emily stepped out onto the porch, stretching lazily. "Dad, you still awake?" Ethan nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, just enjoying the quiet." She leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air. "You worry too much." "I always will," he admitted, eyes still locked on the darkness beyond the fields. Emily laughed, rolling her eyes. "You should try sleeping once in a while." Ethan's gut twisted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just old habits creeping up like ghosts from the past. Or maybe a distant snap of a twig. His grip tightened around the glass. Emily heard nothing. But Ethan did. He placed his drink down carefully. "Go inside, Em." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Now," he said, his tone sharper. She hesitated, confused, but the look in her father's eyes sent a chill through her. Without another word, she stepped back inside, closing the door behind her. Ethan stood up, his stance shifting subtly, no longer the relaxed farmer, but something else, something lethal. He scanned the tree line again. The night was still. Too still. Something was out there, and it had just made a mistake. The hunted becomes the hunter. Inside the SUV, Cruz put out his cigar. "He knows something's off," he muttered. One of his men, Lobo, a bulky man with prison tattoos, grinned. "So what? It's 5 of us and 1 old soldier. We get in, we take what we want, and we leave." Cruz smirked. "Then let's get started." The doors of the SUV swung open silently. The men moved with practiced precision, sliding into the darkness like predators closing in on wounded prey. They thought they were in control. They thought Ethan Carter was just another man. They had no idea who they were about to face. The night bleeds red. The farm had never known violence. Not like this. Ethan Carter stood motionless on the porch, his fingers curled into fists as he listened. The night was betraying him, whispering secrets in the way the wind shifted, in the subtle tremors of the earth beneath his feet. Someone was out there. He could feel them watching. Inside, Emily had locked the door as her father told her. She wasn't sure why, but the look in his eyes unsettled her. He had been on edge before. Years of military discipline never truly left him, but this was different. This was fear, and her father never feared anything. The first breach. Cruz and his men moved in silence, weaving through the fields like shadows, their footsteps muffled by damp soil. They had done this before. Home invasions, kidnappings, extortions, things that left people broken, things that turned lives into nightmares. But this time, they weren't dealing with a defenseless family. They were walking into the den of a predator. Lobo signaled to the others, pointing toward the side window of the house. The plan was simple: enter quietly, subdue the girl, and get out before anyone even knew they were there. He slid a crowbar under the window frame, applying just enough pressure to force it open without shattering the glass. Inside, the house was dark, empty, too quiet. Lobo smirked. Easy. He climbed in first, landing on the wooden floor without a sound. He turned to help the others through, but something made him pause. A presence. He turned slowly, his fingers tightening around the crowbar. The shadows shifted, and then, from the darkness, a blade flashed. A hunting knife plunged into his throat, slicing deep, severing everything that kept him breathing. Lobo's eyes bulged as blood sprayed, hot and thick, across the kitchen tiles. A hand clamped over his mouth, muffling his gurgling screams. Ethan Carter held him firm, whispering into his ear, "Wrong house." Lobo's body twitched violently as the life drained from him. Then, silence. Ethan lowered the corpse to the floor, wiping the knife clean on the dead man's shirt. 1 down, 4 to go. The nightmare begins outside. Cruz checked his watch. Lobo should have been inside by now. He frowned. Something wasn't right. "Go," he ordered. "Now." The remaining men surged forward, splitting up, 2 toward the front door, 1 toward the back. The farm had seemed peaceful, silent. But now it felt like a trap. Emily hides upstairs. Emily crouched in the corner of her bedroom, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could hear footsteps below, more than one, moving with purpose. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She tried dialing 911, but there was no signal. A creak, the stairs. They were coming. Emily grabbed the only weapon she had, a baseball bat, and positioned herself behind the door. If they came in, she would fight. She had no choice. The farmer turns into a soldier. Ethan moved like a ghost, his boots barely making a sound on the old wooden floors. He had already studied their patterns, already figured out their mistakes. These men weren't trained. They were thugs relying on brute force and numbers. That wouldn't help them tonight. Ethan crouched behind the staircase, knife in hand, listening to the men approach. A gun clicked. A breath was drawn. Then he struck. A gunshot roared through the house, shattering the silence. But Ethan was faster. The second man barely had time to react before Ethan's knife carved into his ribs, twisting, pushing deeper, cutting off his screams. Blood dripped onto the wooden floorboards. 2 down. Cruz realizes the mistake from outside. Cruz flinched at the sound of the gunshot. That wasn't supposed to happen. Something was wrong. The plan was simple, quick, easy. So why was it falling apart? His gut twisted. This wasn't just bad luck. This was something else. And then through the open door he saw it, a shadow moving through the house, silent, fast. And then, suddenly, the lights in the house went out. The farm was now a graveyard, and the hunter was just getting started, the first to fall. The gunshot still echoed in Cruz's ears as the house plunged into darkness. A mistake, a simple, fatal mistake. He could feel it in his bones now. Something had gone terribly wrong. This wasn't just some old farmer's house. They weren't dealing with a helpless family. They had stepped into the wrong battlefield. Inside the darkness. Inside the house, Ethan Carter's mind was operating at full capacity, every nerve sharp, every movement precise. He had trained for this, fought in wars worse than this. These men thought they were the predators. They were wrong. Ethan moved through the shadows, his grip steady on the knife, blood dripping from his last kill. He listened, feeling their presence in the dark. 3 left, 1 upstairs, 2 outside. He exhaled slowly. Time to finish what they started. Emily's breath falters. Upstairs, Emily could hear footsteps moving toward her door. Slow, heavy, calculating. She pressed her back against the wall, gripping the baseball bat so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She wasn't ready for this, but she had no choice. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, the door handle turned. Emily's breath hitched. Her father had told her to stay quiet, to stay hidden, to wait. But waiting wouldn't save her. She needed to act. Now. The door opens. The intruder stepped inside, his silhouette outlined against the hallway's faint moonlight. Emily swung the bat with everything she had. It connected. A sickening crack. The man stumbled, cursing as pain shot through his skull, but he wasn't down. Emily's heart pounded as she scrambled back, gripping the bat tighter. The man, Gallo, recovered quickly, his rage boiling over. "You little—" He lunged at her. Emily barely managed to duck, the bat slipping from her hands as she hit the floor. Gallo grabbed her by the wrist, twisting it, making her scream. That was the last mistake he would ever make. The soldier strikes again before Gallo could react. A knife burst through his throat from behind. He choked, eyes wide with disbelief as blood bubbled from his lips. Emily gasped, watching as her father appeared behind the intruder, pulling the blade free with a sickening squelch. Gallo collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Ethan turned to his daughter, his breathing controlled, but his eyes burning. "You okay?" Emily nodded, too shaken to speak. Ethan crouched, wiping his blade on the dead man's shirt. "There's still 2 left." Outside, the last 2 men, Brake Cruz and his remaining man, Torres, had lost all confidence. This was supposed to be an easy job. Now 3 of them were dead. They hadn't heard a scream. No struggle, just silence followed by death. Torres was shaking. "Boss, we should go." Cruz's jaw clenched. "We finish this." Torres hesitated. "He's hunting us, like an animal." Cruz turned to his last soldier. "No, like a ghost." The final decision. Ethan moved to the window, his eyes locked onto the 2 figures outside. One was nervous. One was still dangerous. Ethan grabbed the rifle he had stashed behind the cabinet. He loaded it, checked the scope, took his time, then bang. Torres's skull snapped back, a red mist exploding from the back of his head as the bullet found its home. Cruz didn't even flinch. He just stood there, watching, waiting. Then, without saying a word, he walked toward the barn. Ethan lowered his rifle, his gut twisted. Cruz wasn't running, he was preparing, and Ethan knew exactly why. This wasn't over. Not yet. The war begins. Cruz moved toward the barn slowly, his boots crunching against the dirt, his hands steady. He wasn't afraid. He had faced worse odds before, lost men before. This wasn't the first time things had gone wrong, but this time, this was personal. Ethan knows the game isn't over inside the house. Ethan's breath was controlled, but his instincts screamed. Cruz wasn't running, he was preparing. That meant one thing, he had another plan. Ethan turned to Emily. "Stay here." She grabbed his arm. "Dad!" He shook his head. "This isn't over, stay hidden." Emily hesitated, but she trusted him. She let go, and Ethan disappeared into the night. The barn hides the last threat. Cruz stepped inside the barn, the dim light from a single flickering bulb casting long shadows over the hay-covered floor. The scent of oil, wood, and metal filled the space. He knew exactly where Ethan would come from, so he prepared. He grabbed an old pitchfork, snapping the wooden handle in half. Sharp edges now formed a weapon. Then he waited, listened, breathed. Ethan was coming, and Cruz would be ready. The final hunt. Ethan moved through the darkness outside, calculating. He had a knife, a rifle with 2 bullets left, and the advantage. Cruz was tough, experienced. But Ethan was something else. He had been trained for war, had survived places men like Cruz would never understand. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a weapon. Ethan approached the barn's entrance, stepping carefully over the wooden threshold. Inside, it was silent. Too silent. He felt the trap before he saw it. The ambush crack. A board snapped overhead as Cruz dropped down from the loft, his sharpened weapon aimed straight for Ethan's throat. Ethan rolled back, avoiding the strike by inches. Cruz swung again. Ethan ducked. The broken wood grazed his cheek, cutting into his skin, but he barely flinched. He countered fast. His fist connected with Cruz's ribs, once, twice, 3 times. The air left Cruz's lungs in a painful gasp, but he didn't go down. Instead, he drove forward, using his weight to slam Ethan against a wooden post. Pain exploded in Ethan's back. His vision blurred for half a second too long. The knife, Fine's blood Cruz's hand, found Ethan's rifle strap. He yanked it, hard, disarming him. Ethan stumbled, his grip tightening on his knife. Cruz saw the moment of vulnerability and took it. The broken wood drove forward, straight into Ethan's shoulder. A searing pain tore through him, the makeshift spear embedding itself deep. Ethan gritted his teeth, didn't scream, didn't flinch. Instead, he used it. The final counterattack. Cruz grinned, thinking he had won, but he had made one mistake. He had left Ethan's knife hand free. Before Cruz could pull back, Ethan buried his knife into Cruz's side, deep. Cruz choked on a breath, his confidence shattered. His body betrayed him. He tried to move, but the blade was twisted. Pain exploded through his stomach. Ethan leaned in close, his voice low. "You never should have come here." With one last brutal twist, he ripped the knife free. Cruz's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the dirt floor, blood spilling from the deep wound. His breathing turned shallow, ragged, weak. For the first time that night, Cruz felt fear. Ethan finishes it. Ethan staggered back, gripping his wounded shoulder. His breathing was heavy, his mind was clear. Cruz lay before him, gasping for breath, eyes filled with the realization that this was the end. Ethan lifted his rifle, his last bullet loaded, pointed it at Cruz's head, and bang! The final shot echoed through the barn. Cruz's body went still. The last of the invaders was dead. The aftermath. Ethan stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle, letting the war fade. Then, he turned and walked out, back toward the house, back toward Emily. Because tonight, he had done what needed to be done, and tomorrow the world would learn what happens when you cross the wrong man. The return of a warrior. The night was still, too still. Ethan walked back toward the house, his boots dragging slightly against the dirt. His shoulder burned where Cruz had stabbed him, but he barely felt it. His mind was elsewhere. On Emily, on what she had endured, on the men he had buried tonight. This war was over, but Ethan knew there would be consequences. Emily sees her father again. Inside the house, Emily sat curled in the corner of the living room. She held her knees against her chest, rocking slightly, her breathing shallow. She had heard the shots, heard the fighting, and now she was waiting, for him, for anyone. Then, the front door creaked open. Emily flinched, her breath caught, and then through the dim glow of the hallway light, she saw him, her father, covered in blood. His expression unreadable, his stance unshaken, but she saw it in his eyes. He had won. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan stepped forward. Emily's bottom lip trembled, and before she could stop herself, she ran to him, arms wrapping tightly around his waist, burying her face against his chest. She didn't cry, didn't say a word. She just held on. and for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan held her back. The call he had to make. Ethan let Emily sleep. She had been through too much. He tucked her into bed, then stepped outside, the cold air biting against his skin. His fingers trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply. Then he pulled out his burner phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. "You alive?" Ethan exhaled. "They came for my daughter." A pause. A long, heavy pause. Then the voice on the other end shifted. Serious now. "Who?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "They're dead now." Another pause, then, "I'll be there by sunrise." Click. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket, taking another slow drag of his cigarette. It wasn't over. Not yet. The bodies won't stay hidden somewhere in the distance. A truck's engine roared. Far beyond the farm, just past the tree line, headlights flashed. The men Ethan had killed tonight, they belonged to someone. And that someone would come looking, would want answers, would want revenge. Ethan knew this, accepted this. He had made a choice. And now, war was coming. The first warning. Ethan barely slept. His shoulder throbbed, his muscles ached, but his mind was sharp. He sat on the porch, staring at the darkness, listening to the wind shift through the fields. Then, a noise, a subtle click near the main gate. Ethan tensed, stood, reached for his rifle, and waited. The moonlight revealed two figures, men, dressed in dark clothes, moving too carefully. They weren't farmhands. They weren't locals. They were scouts, sent to assess the damage, to confirm the kill. But they had made one mistake. They came onto Ethan's land. He raised his rifle, lined up the shot, exhaled, then bang! The first man dropped before he even heard the shot. The second froze. Then he ran. Ethan smirked. Let him go. Let him carry the message back. The game changes by dawn, they would know. They would know what Ethan was capable of, that they had chosen the wrong farm, that they had crossed the wrong man. And when the sun rose, they would have to decide. Would they walk away, or would they bring the war to his doorstep? Either way, Ethan was ready, because this wasn't just his fight anymore. This was about family, and when it came to family, he never lost. The storm on the horizon. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and blood red. It was a fitting omen, because war was coming, and Ethan was ready. The man from his past arrives. The old dirt road leading to the farm kicked up dust as a black SUV approached, its engine humming low. Ethan stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as the vehicle came to a halt. The driver's door opened, and he stepped out. A man Ethan hadn't seen in years, broad shoulders, military stance, a face lined with scars, both seen and unseen. Jack Rourke, a former Marine, a former comrade, and the only man Ethan trusted with what was coming next. Jack shut the door, adjusted his jacket, and locked eyes with Ethan. "You look like hell," Ethan exhaled. "Feels worse." Jack smirked. "Still alive, though?" "Not for long if I don't clean this up," Ethan muttered, flicking his cigarette into the dirt. Jack nodded toward the farmhouse. "Emily?" "Sleeping," Ethan replied. Jack's expression darkened. He knew what that meant. He didn't need to ask for details. Instead, he stepped onto the porch, reaching into his pocket, pulling out a folded manila envelope. "You're gonna want to see this." Ethan took it, flipping it open. Inside, photos, documents, and a name. Eduardo El Toro Menendez, the man who owned the men Ethan had buried in the field. The real threat. A monster among men. Ethan had heard the name before. A cartel leader with deep pockets and an army of killers. A man known for making examples out of those who crossed him. A man who never let an attack go unanswered. Jack leaned against the railing, watching Ethan's reaction. "Your boys last night, they weren't just low-level thugs. They were Menendez's nephews." Ethan froze. Jack nodded. "Yeah, you get it now." He's not going to send men next time, he's coming himself. A silence stretched between them. Ethan ran a hand over his jaw. So I have two choices. Jack raised a brow. I run, Ethan said, eyes narrowing, or I end this before it starts. Jack's smirk returned. Glad to see you haven't gone soft. Preparing for war. Ethan didn't waste time. The farm wasn't just a home. It was a fortress in the right hands. Jack and Ethan spent the day setting traps, reinforcing weak points, checking the arsenal Ethan had buried for years beneath the barn. Shotguns, assault rifles, grenades. Enough firepower to turn the farm into a war zone. Jack lifted an old M4, inspecting it. You were planning for something like this? Ethan shook his head. I just don't like being unprepared. Jack chuckled. That's why you're still alive. As the sun set, they stood on the porch, looking at their work. The farm was ready. But so was Menendez. The message, in blood. At midnight, the first sign of war arrived. A car engine roared down the dirt road. Ethan and Jack raised their rifles, ready for a fight. But the car never stopped. It sped past the farm, tires kicking up dust. And then, a body tumbled out from the open door, rolling to a stop near the gate. The car disappeared into the darkness. Ethan lowered his rifle. Jack sighed. Shit. They approached carefully, and as they got closer, they saw who it was. The man Ethan had let go the night before. Menendez's scout, now beaten, mutilated, and strung with a message carved into his chest. Tomorrow night, no escape. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. They're making this official. Ethan clenched his jaw. Then we finish it. Because now, there was no turning back. Tomorrow night, the real war would begin. The last stand. The moon hung heavy and swollen in the night sky. It cast an eerie glow over the farm, illuminating the land that would soon become a battleground. Ethan didn't sleep, neither did Jack, because tonight was the night Menendez was coming, and Ethan was waiting. The final hours before war. Inside the farmhouse, Emily slept upstairs, unaware of the storm approaching. Ethan and Jack sat in the kitchen, the table between them covered in weapons, ammo, and blueprints of the farm. Jack finished loading his rifle, snapping the bolt forward. You still got a way out of this, he muttered. Ethan smirked. And miss all the fun? Jack chuckled. You always were a stubborn bastard. Ethan poured 2 glasses of whiskey. 2 old habits. They clinked their glasses, downed the whiskey, and stood. No more words needed, because there was nothing left to say. The attack begins 1:43 a.m. The howl of engines split through the quiet. Headlights flooded the tree line. 5 black SUVs rolled up the dirt road like a convoy of death, kicking dust into the air. Menendez's army had arrived. Ethan and Jack stood on the porch, watching the vehicles slow to a stop. Men in combat gear spilled out of the cars, armed to the teeth. Shotguns, rifles, body armor. 20 men, maybe more. Jack exhaled. They brought a small war with them. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle. They should have brought more. The SUV in the center had yet to open its doors, until it did, and out stepped Eduardo Menendez. He was tall, imposing, his face weathered by years of bloodshed, a man who had killed more people than he could remember. And tonight, he wanted to add Ethan to that list. Menendez adjusted the gold cufflinks on his tailored jacket, completely unfazed by the situation. Ethan Graves, he called out, voice thick with an unshakable arrogance. Ethan didn't move. Menendez smiled. You killed my nephews, he continued. You left them rotting in a field like animals. He stepped forward. So now, I do the same to you. Ethan smirked. You're welcome to try. Menendez's face darkened, and with a snap of his fingers, the first gunshot rang out. The farm turns into a war zone. Ethan fired first. His rifle barked as the first cartel soldier's chest erupted in red. Jack was already moving, dropping another man before he could even raise his weapon. The cartel scattered, diving for cover. But Ethan and Jack knew this land. The traps were already in place. One man stepped too close to the barn. Boom! A tripwire mine tore him apart. Another tried to flank along the fence. Crack! A hidden shotgun rigged to the gate tore a hole through his chest. Ethan and Jack kept moving, switching positions, using the darkness to their advantage. One by one, the cartel soldiers fell. Menendez watched unfazed, his bodyguards shielding him. The tide was turning, but then they brought out the heavy weapons. The fire burns hotter. A cartel soldier hefted a grenade launcher, leveling it at the house. Foomp! The grenade detonated, sending a fireball tearing through the barn. Wood splintered, flames roared. Jack coughed through the smoke. They're getting desperate. Ethan reloaded his rifle, peering through the flames. Menendez had stepped forward, gun in hand, and his target wasn't Ethan. It was Emily's bedroom window. The line they crossed, Ethan's world, stopped. Menendez raised his pistol. Jack shouted, "Ethan!" Bang! A single gunshot cracked through the chaos. The bullet shattered the glass, lodging itself in the wooden frame just inches from Emily's bed. Ethan saw red. This wasn't just vengeance anymore. This was war. And he was about to end it. The last bullet. Ethan moved without thinking. He stepped from cover and fired. One shot, straight into Menendez's knee. The cartel boss screamed, collapsing to the dirt, clutching his shattered leg. Ethan was already on him, kicking the gun from his grasp, pressing his rifle against his skull. Menendez grinned through the pain. "Do it," he spat. Ethan's finger hovered over the trigger, but this wasn't enough. Death was too easy. He leaned down, voice cold as steel. "You don't deserve a bullet," Menendez snarled, struggling. As Jack came up behind him, jamming a zip tie around his wrists, Ethan stood. "You're gonna spend the rest of your life rotting in a cell," Jack smirked, "if you even make it there." The remaining cartel soldiers ran. Their leader was gone. The war was over. And the farm? Still standing. The morning after the sun rose over the burnt remains of the barn, the farm had survived. Emily was safe. And Menendez? He was on his way to a maximum security prison. Jack clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Hell of a night," Ethan exhaled. "Hell of a life." Jack grinned. "What now?" Ethan glanced toward the horizon, where the past had chased him for years. He had spent his life fighting, running, but now he was done running. He looked at Emily, sleeping peacefully in the house, and he made a decision. "I rebuild," Jack nodded. "You'll need help." Ethan smirked. "You offering?" Jack laughed. "Only if there's whiskey involved." Ethan exhaled. The war was over. The storm had passed. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan Graves was finally home. What would you have done? If someone came for your family, your home, would you fight? Would you run? Or would you make them regret ever crossing you? Drop a comment below. Let's see who's got the guts. And if you made it this far, hit that like button. Because stories like this, they remind us what we're willing to fight for. Subscribe now. Because next time, the war might be even bigger. The content is fictitious and does not reflect reality or encourage negative behavior.